prize at the BMA, and my friend Zoe Charlton introduced me to Mequitta's work, and I loved the work at the BMA, and I did a studio visit and fell in love with it more and more, talking about the process and looking at all of the inspiration. And I'm not going to say too much because I'm going to let you talk about it. So this is Mequitta Ahuja, and these 3 pieces are hers. Also, we have a window that's, if you go out and up these stairs here, and there's a little window space there, and Mequitta's work, there's another piece up there, and it's summer, so it's not necessarily so much that way, but that's typically the thoroughfare for Goucher College. All the students are coming and going up and down this corridor, so it's kind of my draw to try to bring people into the gallery as well. So here's Mequitta.
Thanks. So in my artist statement, I mentioned that my interest is to position a woman of color at the center of a discourse on representation. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what I mean by that. So it is my assertion that the entire figurative painting tradition can be summed up like this. The figurative painting tradition is the unseen made visible through a meaningful fiction. Unseen because it happened in the past or away from public view, in the mind of the artist or in the mind of the sitter. And fictions include everything from the mechanics of illusionism, so if you think about one-point perspective or a single source of light, but I also think about the conventions of painting, so as part of these meaningful fictions. So an idea of painting as a stage set with a subject on the edge of our world and the fictional world of the painting. Or the pulled back curtain, which is probably the most common convention in painting. Or the idea of a subject looking at themselves in a mirror and at the same time making eye contact with the viewer. Or with the idea of using architecture to frame a narrative. So in my work, I'm very consciously taking on different conventions in painting. I use myself as my subject, so my works are self-portraits. And in each work, I'm taking on or addressing different issues of representation. So these 3 paintings are part of a larger body of work. So the overall series is called Performing Painting, and then each work is individually titled. This piece is called The Artist and Her Model. And the idea, the theme of the artist and the model has a very long history in painting. There's just numerous paintings taking on this theme. In my work, of course, the artist and the model are the same person. So here I'm presenting the artist in the guise of the model, presenting the artist at work. And so it's a reversal of the convention where typically the artist is unveiling the model. And then I'm taking this idea of doubling and applying it throughout the painting. So there are 2 of her, there are 2 drawings, and there are 2 windows. So this is a depiction of a sort of simplified version of my actual studio space, which is in my home. And as you enter my studio, there's windows on the right. And this painting was sitting in my studio one day, and the morning sunlight was coming through the window, creating a kind of bright spot on the painting and casting a shadow of my actual studio window on almost the exact spot where I painted the window in the painting. So I just photographed it and then painted that moment into the painting. This work is called Portrait, and here I'm thinking about 3 types of images. So, like I mentioned, a painting where an artist or a subject is shown looking at themselves in the mirror and at the same time looking at the viewer making eye contact. Also, self-portraits where artists show themselves with one of their paintings. And then the 3rd type of image, if you imagine looking at an artist's monograph and maybe seeing a photograph of them with one of their paintings, right? In an image like that, the artist looks like people look when they're in photographs, and often their artwork depicts a kind of stylized figure. So again, here I'm just reversing that relationship. So creating the central figure in my work in a kind of stylized manner, and then using the painting within the painting, painting that almost like a photograph. And I'm not applying this notion of painting like a photograph to the work overall. I'm isolating it in the picture as a way to point to it as a tool of representation. And then in the third work, so this piece is titled Birthday, and here I was thinking about Picasso's Les Demoiselles d'Avignon. Hope maybe some of you know that painting. So some of the things that I repeated from Picasso's painting, this almost statue-like figure on the left in this kind of fabric alcove, the central gaze, returning the gaze of the central figure, this kind of squatting figure here, and the still life, as well as a kind of three-part construction of space. So those are all things that you'll see in Picasso's Les Demoiselles d'Avignon. And something that I'm doing differently in my work, I'm taking the tension that in Picasso's painting is directed outward to the viewer, and I'm turning it here internally so that the main tension of the gaze in my work is one of introspection, a woman confronting herself. You know, if you think about the history of painting, there's so many depictions of women as either the virgin or as a prostitute. And so Les Demoiselles d'Avignon being a painting of prostitutes. So this is sort of my rebuttal to that history. Here I'm presenting a woman on her 40th birthday. And the issue of form and representation that I'm really thinking about in this work is the idea of architecture framing a narrative. So I've positioned key information, the birthday balloons with the number 40 outside of the main room of the painting. And then in my use of color on the floor, on the walls, and then especially these strong verticals, I'm creating a kind of unit of space for each of the figures so that the spaces almost kind of fit together almost like a triptych. So I'm thinking about the architecture here describing the structure of the painting. So in all of my work, I'm thinking about these painting conventions, trying to relate my work to other works from history. I use myself as my subject, and I isolate pictorial devices, issues of representation as a way to, again, position a woman of color at the center of this discourse on representation. So thanks for listening, and thank you, Laura, for organizing the show and including my work. I didn't know if you wanted to do
I want to add something. So, the majority of you may be familiar with art history and different things that have happened, but for those of you who are not, I'm doing this for you, sweetheart. So, this with the curtain being pulled back, and especially with somebody holding it, the curtain pulled back is a metaphor for voyeurism, and it's alluding to the fact that we are being let in on this secret or personal experience that's happening within the picture plane. So when you see a curtain pulled back, and which we have it twice here, that's what it's alluding to historically back through art history, when a lot of artists have done stuff and they pulled back that curtain. We're being privy to something that's very private. And the same goes with the gaze and with the artist looking back out at the viewer. Like Edouard Manet's Olympia is probably one of the most popular ones, where she's a prostitute and she is a woman looking right back at the people who are looking at her. And that was a huge thing then. Like, people didn't do that. The gazes were turned so that people could look at the naked body unencumbered, because they were just allowed to look at it. So with the subject looking back at the person, it puts a whole new tension on the piece. And so what she's doing in these pieces is speaking to these very historical things that have happened and using them in a very contemporary way. Also, she didn't speak about her texture. But if you get up close, well, you don't even need to be that close to see it, actually. But texture, lots and lots of mark making, and every single surface has its own texture, which is really, really beautiful. And also, she didn't really talk about it, but these flattened surfaces is also the way that she's worked with a linear perspective and flattening the picture plane and what we're looking at is also very something that you do in all of your work and really important in the composition of her pieces as well. Yes.
Sure. What were some of your inspirations, some of the artists from the past, say? Because this, I'm thinking of Van Gogh when I see this, the floor, very much his interior, the home spaces, domestic spaces, thinking of that floor, the angles of the floorboards, the texture of it. Even
yeah, I mean, there's so many different sources. I'd say for me, Giotto being probably especially in terms of this idea of framing a narrative with architecture. And I think this, I don't do it as much in these works, but if you're curious to see more of my works, you can look on my website. But this idea of having a kind of inside space and an outside space, that very much comes from me looking at Giotto's work. This is kind of me thinking about Goya and Zurbaran. Goya and Zurbaran had, this is called a cartellino from Italian. It's this idea of embedding a signature into a painting by using a small piece of paper or card that's almost like an artist's calling card and embedding it into the picture, the sort of fiction that you built in the painting. So it's her birthday, this is a birthday gift, maybe this is a gift card, but it's a way also for me to sign my painting in essence. I love Zurbaran. I don't know if I pronounce his name correctly. I don't know, there's so many names.
I was wondering what intrigued you about the fact that was going to be wood, and you made you went to such an amount of detail in making it look like wood panels. Was there a reason for that?
I guess because to me, when I think about one-point perspective, I think about floorboards. You know, or tile. I guess floor tiles would be another one, but this is kind of the most simple version. We do have floor, wood floors.
It really stands out. It's nice.
Also one of those, I call them happy accidents, those things that occur when you're not expecting them at all. But the use of the wood floor comes up, or wood in general, kind of comes up over and over again throughout the exhibition. And so those are, when you bring artists in, you're like, oh my gosh, like you didn't realize that there was this parallel and this discussion happening between the works. But if you look at Mequitta's work, the wood and the floor is there. If you look at Alessandra's work, the wood is there. If you look at Michelle Dixon's pieces, wood, very different. But then if you look at Kyle Hackett's work, who is in this corner right here, again, that wood floor. So those are the things that kind of help unite and tie the different works together in the exhibition. Again, total happy accidents, and you get in and you're like, holy cow, that's awesome. Didn't even think about it before. So now, oh, I'm sorry.
No, say it's Mequitta.
Yes. Does anyone have any other questions for Mequitta?
Or I'll also be around if anybody wants to talk about it.
Yes. So now we're going to move to Sheldon. Where are you, Sheldon? Oh, okay.